follow evacuation orders and prepare for severe weather conditions. Pakistani national Asif merchant with a
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
It's a delight that today is the 8th of the 8th, which is incredibly lucky, not only for people around the world, but also the 8th of the 8th is Octopus Day, Octopus TV and various other things. And I always say, look, every move that you take, every breath that you take, they're watching you. And I'm going to be doing a deep dive into what that means. As I say, data is the new currency, and we'll be talking about Google in a bit. So what are the legal proceedings? Basically, he's currently in custody and legal proceedings are ongoing. Authorities are investigating the case. So we're going to get more and more about this sort of side. What it does highlight in this extraordinary time is the ongoing security concerns and threats against high-profile figures. And a very different high-profile figure at the moment, Taylor Swift. She was due to do a concert in Vienna. I was talking about this morning. And she's abandoned that in spite of the zillions that it would have earned her, again, because of one of these threats. So we need to be aware of what's going on in the world, and various surveillance companies are enabling us to do that. It is interesting how sometimes the media can bandy all sorts of names around, and sometimes it's more than one plot that is foiled. But certainly Asif Merchant, who flew from Pakistan to find the hitman, certainly he's the one who's referenced in the ABC news articles. And what's guaranteed is clearly there's more than one plot. And as you say, the timing is quite extraordinary, because it was just before the Trump rally where he famously got that ear injury. And what happens, there's all sorts of questions to be asked. And I always urge on this program and others that we must question everything, not just about the identity, about the names that are bandied around, but also about how things happened. I am still astounded that a hitman could get onto a roof within 100 yards of Donald Trump and wasn't stopped beforehand. All those sort of questions need to be asked. And as you rightly point out, question the names of everything. Media check out other bits and pieces, because how many more plots are going to be uncovered? And I suspect if people keep digging and digging and digging, there are lots of these plots. And I suspect that they're going to be drip fed. And you then have to ask the question, well, why are they being drip fed? Well, there's some political mileage in turning around and saying somebody is under threat. And I would certainly suggest that there's been some sort of political mileage in terms of Trump's popularity. He was hailed as a hero with that iconic image of him after he had been shot. Fight, fight, fight. You remember, on that sort of basis. And I predict that that will go down in history as one of the iconic images of this particular time.
Although it's worth noting that Google might have scrubbed that image. We can come on to that when we look at Google's monopoly of cyberspace. Shortly.
This is absolutely right, Basil. And this is why we make such a great double act. I thought and triple act with three of us, because I thought I'd mention that. And you're right, that's the image that I would thought be top of every single search. But surprisingly, it's disappeared. Draw your own conclusions. Again, sort of highlighting the risk in this day and age when we come on to the beautiful segue for Google is looking at the names and how different stories can be conflated, if you like, on that sort of basis. And what I would urge everybody to do is double check everything, because names get bandied around and they get substituted. And I was looking again at the particular name which you mentioned. There were a number of different pictures, and they've been wrongly ascribed, if you like, for particular stories. Some people who have exactly the same name, and there are quite a few common names where this happens. And this is why it's so important in this day and age to question everything. And I think what we try and do always is we recommend people get their information from several different sources, because as we were about to come on to, when we talk about things, the way that you can manipulate information so that you take things as gospel. And just as a brief comment, I talked about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And we were previously talking about, well, hang about, when you do your Google search, when I talk about that iconic image, which I referenced beforehand, I remember looking on the Muckrakers a few days afterwards, and bizarrely, that iconic image couldn't be seen on the first few scrolls of Google.
The Muckrakers are restless. This is today's News Talk, TNT.
Was he unlucky in recruiting a hitman? That the guy he got in touch with, I've no idea, through the internet or the yellow pages, just happened to be actually a member of the FBI? That would be very, very unlucky. as well as unprofessional on his part, though, you know.
I have to say, I find the whole thing extraordinary, which is why when we start banding these names around, is that you're quite right to ask these questions, because it sounds like something out of the movies. You know, I want to recruit a hitman. Well, here's somebody from the FBI. I mean, I don't buy it. I think we need to dig a bit deeper into that sort of stuff. It doesn't make sense. And why is it being drip fed? And why there are so many different names? I think this is what highlighted at the very beginning when you're looking at this sort of stuff, because there are so many different people. And I can guarantee, in the same way as we predicted the vice president Kamala's running mate, I can guarantee there will be more names bandied around. And what we should do is just question all of them. And actually, before we condemn anybody, let's wait for that evidence. Let it go through the due process. So rather than just saying, oh, here's a name and so on and so forth, and here's their wonderful background, and rupees are not worth very much anyway, so $1 billion is not worth tuppence halfpenny. But the reality is that we do need to ask those questions rather than just rushing in. And there's that weird thing we have in the news, but people elsewhere apart from on TNT, what they will do is the rush to be first. It's not the rush to be accurate, it's the rush to be first, because you want to break a story and so on and so forth. And I think, if anything, this is another one where we have to question everything, take a step back, work out, look, is this really the elements? And if not, are there particular questions that should be asked? And we will continue to ask those questions.
The whole case reminds me of one that surfaced in China a few years ago, where a woman paid a hitman thousands of yen to assassinate her husband, to murder him. And then she went to the police to complain that the hitman had defrauded her and had not carried out the execution. True story.
I love it. And this woman is going to be a guest on the Muckrakers next week. It's going to be good. It is quite extraordinary. Question everything. We always say that. And I always like to put things in perspective and get the latest news about what Google is worth. And it tells you what a sort of global gorilla it is. In Q2 of 2024, the total revenues was $84.74 billion. That's $84.74 billion, which is absolutely huge. And it's anticipated to reach $273.37 billion in 2024. And just to put that in perspective, Google itself, as you probably remember, was founded in 1998 by Larry Page and Sergey Brin when they were PhD students at Stanford University. And the company quickly grew and became the leading search engine, and expanding into other digital services and products. Now, when you get that big and that enormous, obviously the lawyers all had their eyes on you. And in particular, the European Commission began investigating Google's dominance in search advertising in 2008. In 2010, there were various investigations and fines were imposed by the European Union, including about anti-competitive practices, about abuse of its search dominance, and unfair practices, as I say, in advertising. In 2017, just to talk about the billions again, the EU fined Google $2.4 billion for manipulating search results in favour of its own shopping services. It's what I said beforehand about making things disappear, and I referenced Trump, and I think Basil might have some points on that in a bit as well. But to manipulate the results when people are relying on those search things, that was the complaint in that sort of side. 2020, the US Department of Justice had filed a landmark antitrust lawsuit against Google, accusing it of maintaining an illegal monopoly in search and digital advertising. And in 2021, the EU imposed additional fines and restrictions on Google, focusing on its Android operating system and online practices. And I think just to give sort of Basil an opportunity to respond, because I know he wanted to mention something about the Trump case, it's putting this into perspective. Is this global gorilla worth absolutely billions is controlling, if you like, how we get information. So if you tap in a search request and it promotes particular answers to you, it basically will give you the narrative, whatever narrative the person who pays the most for gets you to do. On a simple basis, say, give us the best plumber in the world. Well, whoever pays the most money is the best plumber.
Well, the great thing about Google from the early part of this century was that, totally revolutionized search. I'm old enough to remember Alta Vista in the pre-Google days. And then Google came along and you just got much, much better results. It was as simple as that. It was totally neutral and, produced whatever information, whatever links you wanted. Now, it's changed quite dramatically over the last 10 years in so many ways. First of all, If you search for anything on Google now, the first 6, 8 items you will see are sponsored. They're paid for, rather than just simply being search results. You have to scroll quite a long way down, and the search results are interspersed with adverts, paid adverts. And then, of course, about 7 or 8 years ago, they started scrubbing independent media like today's News Talk from their search results, whereby basically corporate establishment media was privileged, and if you put a news item into Google and clicked news, you would only get the establishment media results. Lots of independent media suffered huge drops in traffic as a result of that. That's remained the case ever since. But this case focuses on the conditions of the contract that Google had with Apple, whereby they paid Apple about $26 billion in order for the Safari search on all Apple operating systems to default automatically to Google. And this is a sort of monopoly practice, which is what provoked the whole case in the first points. First of all, everybody's always talking about how Google and the United States authorities basically work hand in glove against people. Well, this is an interesting case where actually the Department of Justice have taken it upon themselves to sue Google, to take them to court. So it's very much a sort of intra-elite battle that's going on here, and huge amounts of money generated for lawyers. And the Department of Justice claim, at least, to be acting on behalf of consumers. The second point is, well, what was the result of this? So what if Google paid Apple billions? Well, the result is that Google has been increasing its prices to advertisers. I have a friend who runs a small business here in Somerset, and he says it's very difficult now to get any value out of paying for your Google AdWords or your Google sponsored content, because they charge so much that it's, dubious whether you can generate the sales as a result. More and more businesses migrating to Amazon and various other platforms. So basically, Google bought up all the shelf space on browsers with default search engines, Mozilla, Apple, and all the rest of it, to the exclusion of everybody else. And the key point about that is that other search engines were unable to get the traffic to begin to compete with Google. In order to improve your results, you need the traffic. And if Google is monopolizing the traffic, then you can't improve your search engine because not enough people are using it. So that's why they've had to go at them. You're right, Taylor. It'll take years to unpick this. Obviously, Google are going to appeal, billions of dollars at stake. The remedy phase would be changes to the terms of these contracts to allow other companies to insert their search engines. Final point, the irony, of course, is that most people choose Google anyway for their searches. So why they felt the need to, effectively bribe all these other companies with tens of billions of dollars to keep everybody out of the market, I don't know, but they must have worked out it was money well spent.
Well, it is interesting because they normally work on percentages. And when you have that amount of turnover, which I referenced at the very beginning, they are absolutely huge. But the very business is predicated on, if you pay me money, I will push you up the search engine. And as Basil mentioned, we talked about his local shop owner, who you should actually mention, Basil, because here on TNT, we can plug them. Who were they?
A company called Indigo Herbs of Glastonbury.
Oh, wonderful! What sort of herbs do they sell? Are they illegal?
Well, they sell superfoods.
Brilliant!
Wheatgrass supplements, healing herbs, all that sort of thing.
I love it. They will be delighted, salivating at the thought you're promoting them on TNT, and we'll get our advertising folk to give them a buzz. They can do even better and get more advertising. But it's exactly that. That's the business model, is that basically people are paying to be found. And as soon as you've got that business model, it means that you're not going to have an independent search result. So it's going to be that balance. But people spend a lot of money. It's a huge, huge business. As I say, I gave you the figures at the beginning of this piece, the latest reported figures. Again, always question everything, because what does that mean in practice? But the reality is that it's a huge business. And as it's a huge business, they want to do everything they possibly can within the law to do that. But it also raises the point, sometimes people will turn around and say, well, okay, if the fine is not particularly big or there's no fine at all, then effectively it becomes like a license fee. You can turn around and say, well, we can carry on this practice because we're generating billions. And if we don't have to pay very much money, we would effectively treat that as a license.
Right. That is a really good way to outline it. It's like a license fee. Very interesting. But you're exactly right. If you are not paying for a service online, it's because they are taking something from you. That is your data. This is quite an effective business model, or cost-effective business model, because it doesn't require any inventory. All they do is just take your data. Of course, it is highly unethical, but this is being adopted by various other companies, of course, not just Google, and it's also used on a global scale.
Yeah, I was just going to add, and it's always worth reminding everybody, absolutely everybody, that if you don't pay for a service, then you are the service. And what happens is data, as I always say, is the new currency. So every time you tick those terms and conditions entitling a third party to use all your information, work out what they're doing with it, that's what you're doing. You're paying with attention, and the advertising revenues, the billions and billions that are generated as a result of it. The way that you can generate that billions is by sharing that data. Make sure you don't give permission unless you know exactly what you're doing.
Oh, that whole allow cookies business, hasn't that become tiresome? But I suppose it's for our benefit. Google, of course, is facing new competition from artificial intelligence search engines. So they're partnering themselves with a UK-based startup called Anthropic, and that has brought them into the crosshairs of the UK's antitrust watchdog, which has said earlier this week it's examining whether that partnership represents a merger scenario that negatively affects competition. But that's what they're worried about, that the search could be revolutionized yet again by AI.
And I think it's exactly that. It not only could be, it is being revolutionized. And what's happening is it's generating more and more. Going back to the idea of questioning everything, I always say that artificial intelligence is perhaps our greatest human achievement, but potentially the biggest existential threat. If you thought we're drowning in a sea of misinformation and disinformation, the combination of AI and fake news is going to make it absolutely horrendous. And in 2017, fake news was the word, although it's two words, of the year with Collins Dictionary. In last year, 2023, AI was the word of the year. You put the two together and you have a delicious cocktail of misinformation. So we have to be incredibly careful, and we have to be aware that when we get all these AI-generated search engines and the results that they're going to pump out, which will be lots of videos, it'd be greatly enriched media, we still have to question everything. Go back to genuine sort of values about, does this make sense? What are the sources for this information? Could there potentially be somebody else in the same way as we looked at the very beginning with the different names? What are we looking at here? Because you can guarantee, you can basically get any story supporting any case, any evidence you want, even if that's made up. And I'll give you one final example. There was a wonderful case about hallucinations, and ChatGPT, when it first started, rather like politicians, if it didn't know the answers to something, it would make it up. And there was a wonderful case of a lawyer who was taken, a negligence case. He was representing somebody who was hit, I think, in the leg by one of these trolleys they have on an airline. And he went before the judge and he quoted 3 cases, X versus such and such an airline. And the judge sort of nodded and said, well, Mr. Smith, all very interesting, but none of those cases are true. And the lawyer basically worked out it was this hallucination. ChatGPT had made the whole thing up. And that's what we've got to be very, very careful of.
Well, I saw a report that by manipulating search results, Google could have affected 6 million votes in the last presidential election. And as Andrew mentioned earlier, that image of Donald Trump fist bumping the air after the assassination attempt with blood streaming down his face, that's disappeared, so much so that Florida Representative Matt Gaetz has written to Alejandro Mayorkas, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, to find out what's going on, because, Google has metastasized from being a search engine par excellence into now something very different, which is a creator of our reality. It's set itself up as the fountain of all knowledge, wisdom, and truth. And if something can't be found via Google or is otherwise unavailable, then it simply doesn't exist anymore. In the early years of this century, there was much more of a balance between different sections of the internet and also between our online and offline worlds. But the offline world is becoming increasingly obsolete. People don't buy books and magazines to anything like the numbers that they're used to, and everybody is increasingly dependent on the internet for all their information. Therefore, if you control all the information, you control all the people. It's as simple as that. Very, very dangerous. This particular case doesn't address any of those issues. And of course, there's the other question of net neutrality as well, how quickly you can get to websites, even dissenting websites. But there has been, most importantly, is suppression of anti-establishment narratives, and Google has been at the forefront of that through its shadowy relationship with the national security state.
Yeah, and it goes back to the point we were making earlier, the very fact that you can buy, this is how they get these billions, you can buy results. And the very fact that you can buy results means that you have to question those results, doesn't it? Because what it is in political campaigns and so on and so forth, it's the deepest pockets who will be able to control that narrative. And as opposed to what we do here on TNT, which is search for the truth, what you're effectively getting is the version of the truth which has been paid for with the people with the most money. Now, that's got to be nonsense, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. Quite apart from the political bias of Google's founders, which they openly admit to. Same happened with Facebook in the last election.
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, 2 decades ago, the United States intelligence community worked closely with Silicon Valley in an effort to track citizens in cyberspace. The intelligence community hoping that the nation's leading computer scientists could take non-classified information and user data, combine it with what would become known as the internet, and begin to create for-profit commercial enterprises to suit the needs of both the intelligence community and the public. And that's precisely what happened in the case of Google, isn't it, Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at that sort of stuff. And I always say what we should do, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And as soon as you hear of any of these relationships, as soon as you hear about data being the new currency, and as soon as you hear about how people can buy effectively what information they will be fed to people, you have to question it. So we need to look at these relationships. We need to have that sort of transparency so people can make their own decisions. And I often emphasize that we're living in a very diseased information age where everything we read, everything we see, everything we hear needs to be questioned. And that is why it's so difficult, because people have basically their own prejudices and people surround themselves. They either read the same newspaper or they watch the same channel or they surround themselves in their own little social media group, basically with people peddling the same prejudices. And it's only as a result of keeping an open mind, it's only as a result of trying to look at things and question everything that we can get to the truth. And I keep banging on what I loved and genuinely love about TNT is that's what we have. We have that unwavering quest for the truth, where we don't come with prejudices. We really do come with an open mind, and we'll have a sensible discussion with respect and dignity and so on and so forth. But we need to do that, and we can never emphasize it enough. When you talk about the relationships and all these massive giants, these billion dollar companies and the relationships they have with different parties, it is alarming, and we should be absolutely concerned and call it out whenever we can.
Well, we're all waiting for a knock on the door, aren't we? Rounding up dissidents like they did in Czechoslovakia in the 1960s. But it is true that Google is essentially, was certainly incubated by the national security state. This goes back to DARPA and the massive computer systems link up that they first originated, and then they passed it to the National Science Foundation, and then we got on to something called the Massive Digital Data Systems, and they issued grants, including a key one to a computer science research team working at Stanford University with a decade-long history of working with National Science Foundation and DARPA grants. And the primary objective of that grant was query optimization of very complex queries that are described using query flocks approach. Now, this, of course, was led by Larry Page and Sergey Brin. And the research that they did became the heart of Google. Basically, people using search functions to find precisely what they wanted inside a very large data set. The intelligence community, however, saw a slightly different benefit in their research, in that they wanted the network organized so efficiently that individual users could be uniquely identified and tracked, as indeed we now can be. But, there's so much data now flowing around the internet that you have to wonder, who on earth is sitting there analyzing it all, and what are they going to do with it? So while it's very easy to get paranoid about all this, somewhere there's a spotty bloke in his short sleeve shirt sitting, either in some office of the National Security Agency or GCHQ or whatever, but, do they pose a threat? The real threat comes, as I said earlier, from Google reinterpreting reality for us, from its monopoly on knowledge, it seems to be, in coordination with other key sources like Wikipedia. People used to sort of joke rather disparagingly if you said, "Oh, I found that out on the internet." People used to sort of go, "Oh, the internet. Well, that sort of can't be relied upon." But now that's changed, really, and unless you found it out on the internet, then it can't really be considered as real.
Well, it is interesting. It goes back to what we said beforehand, as I made the point, is that you can find out any evidence that you want to support any argument you want on the internet. And if it's not there, people will make it up. The thing about Wikipedia is that anybody can edit it. It is dependent on the wisdom of the crowd to make sure that they do continue to vet that. But you can change things. It used to be, do you remember that wonderful movie, Paper Moon? Do you remember that?
Vaguely, that was Tatum O'Neill, wasn't it? And
it was, absolutely. And what they did in the olden days, he used to have a bet to watch that. It's a wonderful black and white movie, but he used to have a bet in a bar saying that Samson's hair wasn't cut by Delilah, but Delilah went basically she ordered somebody to go and get some scissors and cut it, so she sent out an instruction that somebody else should go and cut Samson's hair, and he would win this bet in the bar because what he did, he printed out some of these Bibles, put them in hotel rooms with the false narrative, and that's how he won his bets. Great movie, have a look at that. Nowadays, you can do that on the fly. You can change whatever narrative you want. You can change whatever story and get lots of supporting evidence in the blink of an eye. And on data, as I say, data is the new currency. We are giving away so much data every single day. You get filmed hundreds of times every time you walk up and down the street. Every time you use one of these, you're being pinpointed as to where you are. Your whole search history is being used, your likes, your preferences, the movies that you watch, the people you interact with, all of that is being tracked. And as you rightly say, that information is being available to other people, and information is power. We should be very frightened. People used to be worried about identity cards, and whenever there was that sort of discussion about that, I made the point, well, it's far too late for that. You don't need identity cards. You've got your loyalty cards, you've got your credit cards, you've got your mobile phone, you've got the phone basically being filmed all the time with CCTV footage and other things. Your identity, your business, your life is being monitored every single second of every single day.
Exactly. And I know that I had mentioned earlier a lot of emphasis on the CIA, but Google's connection to the intelligence community, I mean, it goes beyond just the CIA. There's one instance in 2006, Google launched Google Federal. And the purpose of this was to help Google launch federal contracts. And a part of this branch, this Google Federal, it included many former NSA agents. And in 2010, there was a significant contractor and information sharing agreement that was established. And this was, as I said, in 2010, during an incident in which Google claims that it was hacked by Chinese hackers in the NSA, and Google then made this information sharing agreement in which Google would provide data about its traffic on its networks in exchange for further protection against foreign hackers or intel from the NSA on the existence of Chinese hackers trying to interfere with its network. So there's just yet another example of how interconnected these two entities are. And again, I mean, Google is meant to be a a private company, you have to have some separation between the intelligence community, governments, and these companies. And we're really seeing a blurring of the lines here. And this goes back to the entire point of our discussion today, which is, this lawsuit. Will there be accountability? And it's hard to be optimistic about real accountability and real positive change when you have this meshing of the private sector, the public sector, government, and the intelligence community. But as we end today's discussion, perhaps we want to look at potential solutions and what people can do to perhaps avoid their information being shared or being stored. I know that is a little bit difficult, but what can people perhaps do to take steps in the right direction to ensure that they and their loved ones are protected against the nefarious use of their data? Either of you jump in.
Well, I can absolutely jump in. As I say, the starting point is to have your eyes wide open if you're not paying for a service. And even if you are sometimes, bear in mind that it's your data that's being used. Don't just click saying accept everything. If you can read it, be shocked, if you like, what's going to happen. And work on the basis, and I say this to everybody, politicians and people in the public eye, work on basically, because they always make the same mistake. History repeats itself because we don't learn the lessons from history. And everything you say, everything you do, every person you have ever met, basically that will all come back to haunt you at the moment you least want it to. And now in this diseased information age, they can actually fake it. So even though it might be, we can get some real pictures out there, all of these pictures can actually be faked now, and videos and sound recordings and everything else. So best advice is go in with your eyes wide open, question everything, and try and get away from those prejudices which are out there, because you will just continue to feed those unless you do look at a different narrative.
Exactly. And you're right. Everybody just seems to sort of click off on these consent forms. I know many of us do it. Who wants to sit there and read through the terms and agreements? Of course, a lot of the language is difficult to understand. We just kind of agree, but perhaps we want to start to get into the mindset of looking through this, being more protective of our data, our information, and maybe switching away from using the Google browser. And I understand it's the preferred one, but perhaps we want to look into some alternatives, or at least switch off some of those cookie settings. I know it can be a hazard, but I think it's worth it, or a hassle. I think it could be worth it in the long run.
But other browsers, sorry, Taylor, just on that, it's no point telling people to go to other browsers, because that's how they get their money as well. So I think we have to be very, very careful. I think always question everything in the same way as we look at Wikipedia, in the same way as I talk about Paper Moon and how people can manipulate things, even back in the olden days. It's been going on forever. And when we did a special on propaganda and how that's been used as a weapon of war. And the advice is the same: just question everything. Turn around and say, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. If there's any reason, what, why, when, how, the standard sort of journalist approach to any information that you get. And is there a potential prejudice? Because you can guarantee if there is a potential prejudice, then the information you're receiving is corrupted.
Yeah, Google, of course, have bought so many companies to assert their dominance over the internet, not least of which is YouTube. Just one example, really, they bought, all their competitors in so many different departments. So we have to really build our own parallel alternative systems to them. Now, I'm afraid I'm not enough of a computer scientist to come up with an alternative search engine to Google, and Microsoft Bing doesn't work anything like as well. The results are frankly abysmal by comparison. That's the whole secret of Google and why they've been able to maintain this dominance for so long, quite apart from bribing people. But certainly with news organizations like Today's News Talk, we have an independent free speech platform here, and we need to do everything we can to continue to promote it. Google picks up from the internet links from, one source to another from social media and what have you. So my answer is to beat Google at their own game and to share as many links to Today's News Talk as you possibly can, whether individual programs or go back to the if you go to the app or website and click presenters, you can see past episodes of this show, other ones that people have been featured on. Absolutely fascinating content. So buzz us around and we can beat Google that way.
Absolutely. Continue to seek out truthful information from independent sources and organizations like TNT. I want to thank both of you for this great discussion today, Andrew Eborn and Basil Valentine. We will continue to follow up on these stories and keep you informed on the Muckrakers on TNT and of
Hour. Go to episodes at tntradio.live.